started as a normal Good Morning America interview quickly spiraled out of control. Clint Eastwood stared down George Stephanopoulos, and the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. No yelling, no insults, just one calm, calculated response. And suddenly, the entire studio went silent. Millions watched in disbelief as Clint Eastwood delivered words so powerful. They left the internet buzzing for hours. This wasn't just an interview. It was a live TV confrontation nobody expected. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Now let's dive into what really happened. Nobody, absolutely nobody, expected this to happen on Good Morning America. What began as a routine, carefully scheduled morning interview quickly turned into one of the most intense and talked about moments ever broadcast live on national television. Millions tuned in expecting a calm conversation with Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood. A respectful exchange filled with nostalgia, career highlights, and polite applause. But within minutes, it was clear something was different. Clint Eastwood didn't walk onto the GMA set like a typical celebrity doing press. There was no forced smile, no exaggerated friendliness, no attempt to charm the camera. Instead, he carried himself with the same quiet authority that defined his decades-long career, calm, controlled, and completely unbothered by the spotlight. Sitting across from him was George Stephanopoulos, one of the most experienced interviewers in American television, a journalist known for sharp questions and polished delivery. On paper, it looked like a balanced matchup. But live TV doesn't follow paper plans. From the very first exchange, something felt off. Viewers at home noticed it immediately. The tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't comfortable either. There was a subtle tension in the air, the kind you feel right before something unexpected happens. Clint's expressions were measured. His posture was relaxed, but alert. He wasn't there to joke around or recycle old Hollywood stories. And more importantly, he wasn't there to be controlled. As the interview continued, it became clear that Clint Eastwood wasn't interested in delivering safe, rehearsed answers. This wasn't a movie set. This was an award show. And this definitely wasn't a place where he felt the need to impress anyone. Every response he gave felt deliberate. Every pause felt intentional. The audience could sense it. This was not going to be a typical morning TV segment. Behind the bright lights and polished smiles, the atmosphere began to shift. The kind of shift producers hate and audiences love. The kind that can't be edited, cut, or softened because it's happening live. As the cameras rolled, what should have been a simple promotional interview slowly transformed into something much bigger. The tension thickened with each passing moment. Viewers leaned closer to their screens. Social media timelines started buzzing, not because of what had been said yet, but because of what felt like it was about to be said. Clint Eastwood's presence commanded the room without a single raised voice. He didn't need to interrupt. He didn't need to dominate the conversation. His silence alone spoke volumes. This wasn't arrogance. This was confidence built over decades. And that's when it hit everyone watching. Clint Eastwood wasn't there to defend himself. He wasn't there to explain his legacy. And he certainly wasn't there to fit neatly into anyone else's narrative. He was there to speak his truth on his terms. By the time viewers realized what was unfolding, it was already too late to look away. The interview had crossed an invisible line. What started as light morning television had quietly transformed into a moment of real confrontation. Subtle, controlled, and incredibly powerful. This wasn't shouting. This wasn't chaos. This was something far more gripping. This wasn't just an interview. It was a confrontation, unfolding live with nowhere to hide. At first, everything felt familiar and safe. The conversation moved exactly how viewers expected it to. Clint Eastwood spoke briefly about his legendary career, the films that defined generations, and the discipline that shaped his life in Hollywood. His tone was calm. His words were measured. There was no ego, only quiet confidence earned over decades in the industry. George Stephanopoulos nodded along, guiding the discussion with practiced ease. The questions were comfortable, predictable, the kind designed to keep a morning show flowing smoothly without controversy. Then, without warning, George shifted gears. The energy in the room changed instantly. His next question wasn't about films or awards. It wasn't about Clint's latest project or fond memories from the past. Instead, it aimed directly at something deeper and far more personal. The question touched on Clint Eastwood's past public statements, his outspoken reputation, and his views on modern culture and today's Hollywood climate. It hinted at controversy without naming it outright. It suggested that Eastwood might be out of step with the times. For a split second, the studio froze. Viewers could feel it through the screen. Clint Eastwood didn't answer right away. He paused. Not the kind of pause caused by confusion or hesitation, but the kind where a person carefully weighs every word they're about to say, fully aware that millions of people are listening live. The silence fell heavy. George leaned forward slightly, his expression focused. He seemed to expect a defensive reaction, maybe a denial, maybe a carefully softened response designed to avoid backlash. But Clint Eastwood wasn't defensive, and he wasn't rattled. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an uncomfortable one. It was calm, almost amused, the kind of smile that signals confidence rather than fear. That smile alone shifted the balance of the interview. Clint looked directly at George, steady and unshaken. When he finally spoke, his voice was relaxed, firm, and deliberate. There was no rush, no anger, no attempt to win the moment. He didn't dodge the question, and he didn't apologize either. His response carried the weight of someone who had lived through multiple eras of Hollywood, seen trends rise and fall, and refused to be defined by any single moment or label. Every sentence felt intentional, as if he were choosing honesty over comfort. As Clint continued, the studio remained silent. No interruptions, no forced laughs, just careful listening. The audience realized something important in that moment. This wasn't going to be a standard media exchange. Clint Eastwood wasn't interested in defending his image. He wasn't there to explain himself to critics or reshape his past to fit modern expectations. He was there to speak plainly. The longer he spoke, the clearer it became that the question hadn't cornered him. It had given him control. George attempted to interject, but Clint continued calmly, finishing his thought without raising his voice. The power of the moment came not from confrontation, but from composure. This was the turning point. The question that was meant to challenge Clint Eastwood had instead opened the door to something far more impactful, a rare moment of unfiltered honesty on live television. By the time Clint finished speaking, it was clear that the interview had crossed into new territory. The balance had shifted. The tone had changed. And everyone watching knew it. This was no longer just a conversation. This was the moment everything changed. Clint Eastwood never raised his voice. He never interrupted. He never attacked. And that's exactly why the moment hit so hard. In an era where confrontations usually explode into shouting matches, Clint did the opposite. He stayed calm, almost impossibly calm. His posture didn't change. His tone remained steady. But the authority in his words was undeniable. He looked directly at George Stephanopoulos, not aggressively, not defensively, but with quiet certainty. Then he did something few guests ever do on live television. He challenged the premise of the question itself. Clint made it clear that he had spent his entire life thinking independently, that his career, his choices, and his beliefs were never shaped by trends, headlines, or public pressure. He reminded everyone that authenticity doesn't come from approval. It comes from conviction. And he wasn't about to apologize for that now. As he spoke, there was a noticeable shift in the room. The power dynamic had changed. This was no longer an interviewer guiding a guest. It was a man speaking on his own terms, unfiltered and unafraid. Clint talked about personal responsibility, how real growth comes from owning your choices instead of blaming the world around you. He spoke about creativity without permission, explaining that the most meaningful work is often created when no one is asking for it. Then came the line that truly landed. He explained that real progress doesn't come from pressure. It doesn't come from forcing people to think the same way. It comes from honesty, sometimes uncomfortable honesty, and the willingness to hear opinions you may not agree with. Every word landed with weight. There was no music, no audience reaction, No nervous laughter to break the tension, just silence. George Stephanopoulos attempted to redirect the conversation, gently steering it back towards safer ground. But Clint wasn't finished, and he didn't rush to wrap things up just to make the moment comfortable. Instead, he continued calmly, finishing his thought without raising his voice even once. That's when viewers later described the moment as classic Eastwood. He reminded everyone watching that long before social media outrage cycles and headline-driven narratives, people were allowed to disagree and still respect one another. That disagreement wasn't something to fear. It was something that built stronger conversations and deeper understanding. He wasn't dismissing criticism. He was rejecting control. The studio audience didn't clap, not because they disagreed, but because they were stunned. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, the kind of silence that follows a statement too honest to immediately respond to. The kind where everyone knows something important just happened, but no one wants to be the first to break the moment. For a brief stretch of time, it felt like Clint Eastwood wasn't just speaking to George Stephanopoulos. He was speaking to the entire media industry, to a culture obsessed with sound bites and outrage, to an audience tired of scripted arguments and manufactured controversy. He wasn't angry. He wasn't emotional. He was confident, and that confidence carried more force than any raised voice ever could. As the camera stayed locked on Clint, viewers at home realized they were watching something rare, a moment of unscripted truth on live television. No filters, no spin, just one man refusing to be reshaped by expectations. In that moment, Clint Eastwood didn't need to dominate the conversation. He owned it, and everyone watching knew it. As the interview began to wrap up, the tension didn't disappear. It lingered. George Stephanopoulos thanked Clint Eastwood and attempted to move the show forward, transitioning back into the familiar rhythm of morning television. But something was clearly different. The energy in the studio had shifted in a way that couldn't be ignored or undone. This was no longer a routine segment. The smiles felt tighter. The pacing felt faster. And beneath it all was the unspoken understanding that something unexpected had just happened on live television. Clint Eastwood remained calm, offering a polite nod before the cameras cut away. No dramatic exit. No final jab. Just quiet composure. But that calm only made the moment more powerful, because the real reaction was just beginning. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, short clips of the interview began appearing online, first on X, then on YouTube, then everywhere else. Headlines started forming. Thumbnails followed. Reaction videos popped up almost instantly. Social media erupted. Some viewers praised Clint Eastwood for standing his ground with dignity and class. They called it refreshing, rare, to see someone respond to a challenging question without anger or defensiveness. Many described it as a reminder of a different era, where confidence didn't need volume. Others weren't so sure. Debates broke out over whether George Stephanopoulos' question was fair or unnecessary. Some felt it crossed a line. Others argued it was journalism doing its job. Comment sections filled up fast, splitting audiences into camps, each convinced they had witnessed something very different. But even those who disagreed on the meaning of the moment agreed on one thing. They couldn't stop watching it. Commentators replayed the clip again and again, slowing it down, analyzing every pause, every facial expression, every shift in tone. People debated not just what Clint said, but how he said it. The calm, the restraint, the confidence. It became clear that this wasn't going viral because of drama. It was going viral because of control. Fans began calling it a masterclass in composure. They praised Clint for refusing to be baited, for answering without surrendering his identity, and for proving that strength doesn't always need to be loud. Even critics, some of whom strongly disagreed with Clint's views, admitted something unexpected. He handled the moment with unmatched calm. In a media landscape filled with shouting matches, viral meltdowns, and carefully manufactured outrage, this moment felt completely different. There was no explosion, no walk-off, no clip of someone losing control. Instead, there was silence, and that silence spoke louder than any argument. Morning television is designed to be smooth, predictable, and safe. But for a brief moment, the script broke, and audiences noticed immediately. They shared it not because it was chaotic, but because it was rare. The lack of noise made it impossible to ignore. People weren't reacting to scandal. They were reacting to authenticity. As the hours passed, the clip continued to spread. News outlets referenced it. Podcasts debated it. Viewers who had missed a live broadcast went searching for the moment everyone was talking about. And the more it was watched, the clearer it became this wasn't just about Clint Eastwood or George Stephanopoulos. It was about a media culture hungry for real moments in a world overloaded with artificial ones. The studio had frozen, but the internet had exploded, and there was no putting this moment back into a box. Because sometimes the quietest moments are the ones that echo the longest. This wasn't just about Clint Eastwood and George Stephanopoulos. It was about something much bigger than a single interview or a few minutes of live television. What unfolded on Good Morning America highlighted a growing tension in modern media between traditional interview formats and individuals who refuse to be reduced to simple labels or scripted narratives. It showed what happens when decades of experience collide with modern expectations and choose honesty instead of comfort. Clint Eastwood didn't walk into that studio looking for a fight. He didn't arrive with an agenda to shock or provoke. Yet, when faced with a question that tried to frame him within a narrow narrative, he refused to step into it, and that refusal mattered. In today's media landscape, conversations are often shaped before they even begin. Guests are expected to respond in predictable ways. Viewpoints are trimmed down into headlines. Nuance is lost in favor of speed and reaction. Clint Eastwood quietly pushed back against that. He didn't destroy anyone with insults or anger. He didn't raise his voice or attempt to dominate the moment. Instead, he dismantled the tension with something far more powerful: clarity, with confidence, with the weight of a lifetime spent standing by his own convictions. Every word he spoke carried the authority of someone who has already lived through cultural shifts, public criticism, and changing trends, and remained himself through all of it. No headline could erase that. No viral clip could redefine it. For viewers, this moment served as a reminder that strength doesn't always shout. It doesn't need outrage, volume, or applause. Sometimes strength simply speaks, calmly, honestly, and lets the world decide what to do with it. That's why the moment resonated so deeply. Audiences today are surrounded by noise, endless arguments, manufactured drama, carefully staged confrontations designed to trend for a few hours before disappearing. Against that backdrop, Clint Eastwood's composure felt almost rebellious. It was real, and people are hungry for that. For live television, the interview offered a powerful lesson. No matter how controlled the environment, no matter how polished the production, authenticity can't be scripted. You can plan questions, you can guide conversations, but you can't fully control how truth lands when someone chooses to speak it plainly. That's what made this moment unforgettable. Not the question, not the tension, but the response. When the cameras are rolling and there's no delay button, no editing room, and no chance to soften the edges, what's said matters more, and how it's said matters even more. This wasn't a viral moment built on chaos. It was built on restraint, and that's why it lasted. Long after the broadcast ended, long after the clip stopped trending, the core message remained. Honesty delivered with calm confidence can be more disruptive than any confrontation. Because when the truth comes out live on television, there's no cutting to commercial fast enough.